Hey friends, Chris here again, and this is episode 3 of Learning to Live by Sitting with the Dying. And this episode's called Resurgam, which is a Latin term, and it means I shall rise again. Let me explain. Years before I ever became a hospice chaplain, something had already begun teaching me not to treat death simply as a moment when our physical cells stopped functioning. I had an experience of something I couldn't explain, and instead of solving the mystery, I just have learned to make room for it. What do you do with an experience you can't explain, but can no longer pretend it didn't happen? To this day, I don't completely understand what happened. I'm not even sure I'm supposed to. I just know it happened. I've never been able to look at the space between life and death quite the same again. Here's the context. For several years, I served as board chairman for a nonprofit that was working alongside local leaders in a community called La Limonada in Guatemala City. La Limonada is this enormous ravine running through the middle of the city. It had once been lush and beautiful, green, but over time, the city diverted sewage into this community, directed into the ravine where families experiencing extreme poverty began building homes there. Eventually, entire neighborhoods developed. Beautiful families and beautiful people live there, but do so in extraordinary poverty. Really just explosive gang violence, very, very limited opportunity. Simply having a La Limonada mailing address would close the doors to employment, other opportunity, services, and young people particularly were vulnerable to this. Many of the young people couldn't even imagine a future beyond the neighborhood. And the possibility of not reaching adulthood was very much a reality for most of them. The organization I served with partnered with Guatemalan leaders who were just trying to create another possibility, write a different story. So they built academies right inside these neighborhoods where kids could receive education, food, medicine, counseling, relationships, and maybe just most importantly, a vision for a different future, a positive one, a living one. So during that time, I had an idea, and it was coffee. Coffee is one of Guatemala's great resources. It's their second largest export. And I just thought to myself, what if we created a coffee company in the United States that purchased Guatemalan coffee and used it to tell the stories of the people of La Limonada? And what if young people could be exposed to the coffee industry, all parts of it? Growing it, roasting it, selling it, retail, social media, marketing, all the spaces. Maybe coffee could be one of those bridges towards a different future for them. That was the dream. And one of my visits there in the community, I sat in the home of a couple teenagers who have lost most of their family to violence. They were hungry, so we brought them some McDonald's. And while we ate, I told them about this just crazy coffee idea I had. And I'll never forget their faces. Their eyes lit up. For a moment, I thought I could actually see hope. And when I walked out of their home that day into the street, a word came to me, and not a word I use very often. and not something that was on my brainstorming list for the name of coffee companies. The word was resurgam. And resurgam is a Latin term, and it simply means I shall rise again. Historically, you would find resurgam as inscriptions or etchings on tombstones from monks of old. It is a declaration in their death and burial that death does not have the final word. Resurgam, I shall rise again. And something about that word just captured everything I hoped for this community. Lale Manada had once been a beautiful, lush ravine. What if it could rise again? What if these young people who had been told by the world that their address determined their future could rise or not? So that became the name, Resurgam Coffee Company. I shall rise again. Months of work followed. Coffee, branding, website, shirts, stickers, magnets, packaging, shipping labels. Finally, we were almost ready to launch. And then just a few days before the launch, I had a dream. Except, I've never known exactly what to call this. It was incredibly vivid. It was dark. It was violent. In the dream, one of those young men I had connected with in Lale Manada, in my dream, was shot in the head. And in the vivid dream, I could see the wound, like a hole directly through his head. And I saw him. And somehow, strangely, he and I continued communicating in the dream. It was almost as if he was trying to convince me not to focus on what had happened to him. It didn't make sense. It was surreal. It was horrifying. I woke up terrified, shaken. I remember thinking, where did all of that come from? Eventually, I did what most of us do with strange dreams, right? I just tried to move on. A few days later, the launch day arrived. Everything was ready. I was about to make the website live, began telling people about Resurgam in this community. And before I hit the button to launch the website, I got a message from Guatemala. The young man from my dream, in fact, had been shot and killed the night before. Even telling that story now, I don't really know what to do with it. The rational part of me wants an explanation. Was it coincidence? Had I subconsciously picked up on something? Was it spiritual? Was it God? I don't know. In the world of death and dying, I'm increasingly comfortable saying, I don't know. But I also can't pretend it didn't happen. So I remember sitting there looking at a company whose name meant I shall rise again. A company that was inspired in part by this young man. And now he was himself dead. I was heartbroken, angry, confused, asking questions I couldn't answer. Why would I have that dream? Why him? Why would I seemingly be invited into something I couldn't even change? I didn't receive an answer. I still haven't. So I launched the company. I did it in his memory. Not because everything suddenly made sense. It didn't. But simply because I didn't want violence to have the last word. Looking back, I think something began changing in me during those years. Long before I ever walked into a hospice room, professionally, death was teaching me to become comfortable with mystery. I began to wonder if the line between what we can see and what we cannot, it may be thinner than I assumed. Maybe the veil isn't as solid as I once thought. Honestly, I don't know. I began to understand that there may be experiences we shouldn't rush to explain. Maybe wonder is the appropriate response. My own faith gives me language for some of this. Yours may give you different language. Maybe you don't have spiritual language for it at all. It's okay. I'm not telling this story because I need you to interpret it the way that I do. I'm telling it just simply because it happened to me. And it changed me. And maybe it's just an invitation into wonder. Years later now, I find myself sitting beside dying people as a hospice chaplain. Strangely, I'm not afraid of that space. In fact, I'm very much at home there. Can't explain it. I don't feel like I need to explain everything that happens there. I can sit. I can wonder. I can allow mystery to remain mystery. Maybe this young man began teaching me that long before I would need it. Resurgam, I shall rise again. So here's a question I've carried with me ever since. What do you do with an experience you can't explain, but can no longer pretend it didn't happen? Maybe not everything mysterious needs to be solved. Maybe some things are simply invitations to wonder. That's something I'm learning about living by sitting with the dying. Peace, my friends.